Welcome to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us today.
Welcome back to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. This week we have Dr. Laura Lindsey from the Department of Horticulture and Crop Science, and she is Ohio State Extension's Soybean and Small Grain Specialist. Welcome, Laura.
Thanks.
So today's going to be a little interesting because we're talking about a non-traditional crop in Ohio, malting barley. Why is there an interest in growing malting barley in Ohio?
I think there's an interest right now in growing malting barley in Ohio because there's been an increase in the number of craft breweries on the eastern side of the U.S. So Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, all in the past few years have seen a drastic increase in craft brewing. And also there's a malting barley facility that will be constructed in Ohio. So there'll be a new potential market for malting barley in the state of Ohio.
That's fantastic. So what are some of the reasons why Ohio is a good candidate for growing malting barley?
Ohio's a good candidate. We have a malting barley breeder in the Department of Horticulture and Crop Science who has been working on developing new cultivars for probably close to 10 years. So there's been a lot of work in that area. And again, we have that market. The other interest in malting barley in Ohio is because it's harvested about 2 weeks earlier than winter wheat. So this opens up the window to double crop soybeans, especially in the northern part of the state.
Yeah, 2 weeks can make a big difference.
2 weeks makes a really, really big difference for soybeans.
Laura, is it the recent boom of the craft brew market that has sparked interest in malting barley? Why haven't we been growing it until now?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is having an outlet, a place to sell the grain is a big deal, having a place to sell it.
So hopefully this new malting facility works out okay.
Yeah, hopefully.
So could you explain obviously malting barley is a food grade crop. So what are the differences that we need to pay attention to when growing malting barley as opposed to, say, for feed?
Yeah, so malting barley does go into a product that's consumed, mostly beer, but not necessarily beer, but mostly beer. But quality is really important for the grain. So part of the malting process is to sprout the grain. So we have to have good germination. So we're not just harvesting grain and having something eat the grain directly. We have to sprout it first for the malt. So we have to have good germination, high germination, low vomitoxin. So they're looking for less than 1 part per million vomitoxin levels, and then also low protein.
How does that vary from our feed grade barley?
I haven't worked with feed grade barley, but I mean, with feed grade, I would assume you would want low vomitoxin as well because you're feeding it to something. Protein, I would assume with feed, you would want higher protein for an animal. And then germination, of course, wouldn't matter at all for feed.
So Laura, obviously this is the first year for testing barley in Ohio. But what kind of quality are you seeing out there this season?
Yeah, so it's my first year on the agronomy side. The barley breeder has been doing it for like a long time. Our trials themselves, we've seen really good test weight. So test weight for barley should be around 48 pounds per bushel. Our test weight is very close to that. So we've had really good test weight. And then we've also measured protein with all of our trials. Protein is, they want protein that is 9.5 to 12.5% on a dry weight basis. And we can hit that most of the time, but there is a relationship between the amount of nitrogen we put on in the spring and protein content. So with higher nitrogen rates, we did sometimes get protein over that 12.5%. So that's part of our research, is looking at the trade-off between yield with more nitrogen, but still low enough protein content.
So you did some nitrogen trials this year, right? And that's what you're looking at then?
Yeah, we did a nitrogen rate trial at 3 locations in Ohio, in Wood County, Clark County, and then also Wayne County. And we had 4 different nitrogen rate treatments in the spring, 0, 40, 80, and 120 pounds per acre. At the Wood County location, we were able to apply 120 pounds of nitrogen in the spring and still be on average less than that 12.5%. But at the other two locations, Clark County and Wayne County, when we applied much more than 40 pounds of nitrogen in the spring, we exceeded that 12.5% protein content. So nitrogen, I think, and nitrogen management is going to be really key from a protein standpoint.
So when the protein goes over that 12.5%, does that, what does that really affect? Is it the germination that it affects, or just the flavor?
It affects the quality of the beer. And I'm not a malting expert by any means, so you need someone in food science to come and talk to you. But yeah, it affects the quality of the beer, so they want a lower protein content.
Yeah, this is so far out of my typical realm that I have a lot of curiosity questions more than agronomic questions.
It's out of my realm too, but it's been really fascinating to work on a crop that is completely new, because everything you learn is new. So it's been fun to work on it.
So in addition to your nitrogen trials, what else did you test this spring?
We also looked at seeding rate. We assume that malting barley is similar in terms of planting date, seeding rate, things like that as winter wheat. But we wanted to see if there was any differences there. So we did a seeding rate trial at the same three locations, Wood, Wayne, and Clark County. The optimum seeding rate looked like it was between 1.6 and 1.8 million seeds per acre, so maybe slightly higher than what you would plant for winter wheat. But our stand was pretty good going into spring. We did have some heaving in the Worcester location where from freeze-thaw cycles where some of the roots were pushed out of the ground. But malting barley stand can look extremely, extremely thin and not great in the spring, but it is able to recover and tiller out and fill in better than I would have thought it could.
So do you have any intention? I know in wheat, some of your research has been around replant decisions for wheat. If the stand can look bad and still perform well, are you planning on doing some trials on replant decisions for barley?
We did, yeah. So in the spring, it was at Feeks 5, we went out and we evaluated stands. So we call them stem counts, because I don't distinguish between the main stem and tillers because it's really hard to do that. So we count the number of stems in a foot length of row, which is pretty tedious to do. But basically we want to see what is the number of stems we need there at Feeks 6 to have a crop that will yield reasonably well. And then we're also using a relatively new smartphone app called Canopeo, which I'm sure you guys have heard of, where we're taking pictures of that same general area where we do tiller counts and trying to correlate that to yield, because we think farmers are going to be much more likely to take a picture to evaluate their stand rather than getting on their hands and knees and counting tillers. And we've seen a really good correlation between Canopeo and our stem counts and yield, better than seeding rate. Seeding rate and yield are very poorly related. It's what you have in the spring that really relates to yield.
You mentioned there is the potential for higher yields with double crops because we can plant them earlier. Have you looked at the economics of it compared with wheat?
Yeah, in terms of our northern site in Wood County was harvested first. So the harvest date on that was June 21st. So that's really early. The other two locations were harvested June 29th. That was in Worcester in Wayne County, and the other one was June 25th. So normally when we do double crop soybeans, and I've never done them in the northern part of the state, but along 70, usually double crop beans there, we can plant maybe the first or second week of July. So for the northern part of Ohio to be able to plant soybeans June 21st, that should make a really big difference because planting date is one of the biggest factors that affects soybean yield, and earlier is always better. With that, double crop soybeans also need water. So there's also, depending on how much rainfall we get, it'll affect soybean yield. So if we have a good planting date and water throughout the growing season, I think double crop soybeans can do quite well.
What about strictly looking at the barley? Any idea there on profitability potential over wheat?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I know there are people working on that, and it depends too on the contract. So there's contracts for barley, and I don't have that contract. So farmers would need to look at their contract and look at that structure, because the pay grade may be dependent on quality and which quality standards are met or not met. So quality is going to be really key there, and the contract in terms of profitability. And then the double crop soybeans will have to go hand in hand there, because I think that's going to be a big chunk of the profitability, especially in the northern part of the state that can't double crop normally.
So one thing that is often helpful for making the numbers work with wheat is the straw that you get with that crop also. Is there any value with barley straw?
Yeah, there's value. We did measure straw. I don't have the numbers crunched yet, but we did take straw biomass measurements to get an idea how much straw was coming off, especially in our seeding rate trial, because there could be a relationship there. But from what I've heard, that the barley straw can be fairly high value. I don't know how well it works, but it can be sold to control algae in ponds. So there could be a market there. So. And it's usually a high quality straw, because there won't be a lot of weeds, because if you have a lot of weeds, it's not good for your barley crop. So from what I've heard, straw can be a really high value component of winter malting barley.
So I think the bottom line here is being able to make malting quality, because if you don't, there's not much of a market for feed grade barley in this area. So what are the chances of farmers, what's the risk there of them making malting quality or not making malting quality?
Yeah, there's definitely a risk. And our trials, I think we haven't measured all the quality yet. We haven't looked at germination or vomitoxin, because we're in the process of setting up those in the lab. But there is a really high risk. And with our trials, we really, I don't want to say babied the crop, but we did baby the crop. We had really good weed control. We made sure that was all taken care of. We had timely fungicide applications, and we applied it by hand with a backpack sprayer to make sure we were there on the field at the right time, because we have small plots, so we can do that. So we really tried to take care of the crop to get what we hope to be really high quality. So farmers will have to keep that in mind. And I've been told to think of it more as like you're producing seed, because you need to produce something that will germinate. So extra care, harvesting, and drying down to not kill germination is really important. So you kind of have to shift the mindset from a commodity crop to almost producing seed.
Any idea if different parts of the state are better set up to grow barley as far as climate goes?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And we only have 1 year of our agronomic data. But in terms of yield, just of 1 year, which can change year to year, because every time I say something based on 1 year of data, the next year the opposite happens, because that's the way research works. But based on our 1 year of data, the Wood County location was the highest yielding. We ranged from 80 bushels to about 110 bushels per acre in Wood County. And the 80 bushels was achieved with no spring nitrogen application, just 20 pounds in the fall. So that's kind of neat. And then after that, the western location was the next highest yielding, and that ranged from about 65 to 90 bushels, 0 to 120 pounds of nitrogen. And then the Worcester location was lower yielding, about 55 bushels to maybe 65 bushels per acre. And some of that can be related to planting date as well. Our Northwest location was planted the earliest on September 23rd. And then our other two locations were planted 3 to 6 days later. So I think there could be a planting date effect as well, because what I've seen and what the farmers have seen and the barley breeder has seen earlier is better, but not before that fly-free date, because there can be problems there.
That's a big difference from top to bottom in yield. And I know too, OARDC or Worcester was the lowest yielding. Mm-hmm. They had quite challenging weather conditions.
They did. Yes.
In both fall and spring.
Yes. Yeah. Planting earlier is better. I know some of the breeding plots in Worcester were planted quite late because of just challenges with weather. And sometimes harvesting can be a problem too, in terms of weather really anywhere in the state. But yeah, we had a pretty large swing in yield across the state.
Yeah. Do you have plans next year to increase the number of sites with yield trials or stick with the same 3?
We're going to stick with the same 3. When we do things with nitrogen manipulation, doing it at a research facility, OSU research facility, is really key. Otherwise, farmers can go through and top dress nitrogen, and we won't have our rate trial. Seeding rate we could do at other locations potentially, but for us right now, it's a lot easier to keep it on the stations. But I do have a graduate student starting this fall, which I guess is now tomorrow classes start. And he'll be doing some on-farm work looking at stand evaluation. So we won't have actual treatments in the field, but he'll be going out and looking at stand in the spring and then trying to relate that back to yield. So we will have some on-farm things, not trials, but we will have some on-farm things coming soon.
Yeah, well, we know I like on-farm research.
Yes,
and
yes.
I get excited about the specialty crops too because they're new and exciting.
Yeah, but then the stand stuff, we can see a really good relationship with stem counts and the canopeo on small plots, but we need to see if that transfers to field scale because sometimes that doesn't happen. Usually it does. Usually we can transfer small plot to large plot, but I think in this case we really need to test that.
Well, I think overall it is, like Elizabeth said, pretty exciting opportunity. I hope it works out because we know how the wheat market's been here and we've just seen those acres decline. So it'd be nice to have another crop that's profitable and, reasonable for farmers to work into their rotation again.
Yeah, absolutely. 3 crop rotations are better than 2 or 1. So if we have another option as a small grain option for rotation, that would be great.
Yeah, and especially in Northwest Ohio, any opportunity we have to get, I know cover crops are a big deal, but get a crop on there that is growing through the winter.
Yes.
That also provides value in the spring and summer is a lot better scenario economically.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I know you guys put together a Malting Barley small publication or bulletin, and have you updated that, or where's that available?
Right now it's available on my website, which is stepupsoy.osu.edu, and there's a tab for winter malting barley, so you can download the PDF free there. And this hasn't been updated with our trials from this past year. But I do have a couple of reports for both of our trials as a PDF. They're not uploaded yet, but they will be soon. So the first year data will be available. And then when we have 2 years of data, then we'll go and update the guide. So I feel more confident once we have 2 years of data to incorporate that into the guide. And there's also other people doing research as well. Pierce Paul's been doing a lot on the pathology side, primarily vomitoxin. So he'll have some results as well, hopefully in a couple of years to update the guide.
And what else is in there?
The guide, it has cultural practices at planting, fertility recommendations. Mark Laux has a really nice section about weed control, because weed control is really important for winter malting barley. And you also have to pay really close attention to the herbicides you're applying, because if you apply something to the barley, it may not be friendly for double crop soybeans. And if you plant something to the soybeans the previous year, you may not be able to plant a small grain. So you have to really be in tune to what you're applying from a herbicide standpoint and what are the the planting options for the next crop. So you have to really dial into that. And so there's information about herbicides in there. And also plant pathology with Pierce contributing to that section.
Excellent. So make sure you check out Laura's website, Step Up Soy, and check that out. Laura, do you have any other resources that you would like to share?
For malting barley, those are the main ones we have right now. This is all very much a work in progress. It's a new area right now. But just in terms of resources in general, my website has a lot of information about soybeans and small grains. You'll also be able to find the Ohio Agronomy Guide there as a free PDF, which we just released a year ago. So that's all updated. It's free on the website. So that's another resource.
So while we have you here, Laura, why don't you just give us a quick update on what's happening with soybeans this year?
Soybeans look excellent this year. We were able, with our trials, we have performance trials all across the state. Our performance trials, we had really good planting dates, with the exception of North Central Ohio. They were extremely wet this spring, but outside of North Central Ohio, our planting dates were really good. Our trials look excellent this year. I think it's one of the best looking years for us in the recent past, which is great. And Elizabeth and I were talking earlier, this August rain has been crazy, in a good way, crazy good. Usually when we have rain in August, that really helps fill out the seed and increase yields. So I'm hopeful we'll have really great yields, especially in those areas that have gotten this August rainfall.
Yeah, I know in our area, we're averaging 1 inch to 1.5 inches a week, which for August, most years is unheard of.
Yeah, and that's going to be huge.
Yeah, we'll take it as long as it shuts off as soon as everything senesces,
That's
so
the
that we
other
can
key.
get in the field.
Yes.
Yeah, I've noticed that, I think it was last week, maybe end of week before, that some of the beans around here are starting to change already. So I think farmers are really excited about the yield potential for corn and soybeans this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was following Ohio Country Journal on their crop tour, and a lot of the beans that they looked at, those fields were rated as very good or excellent. So that's exciting. Sometimes it's hard to tell till you get out there with the combine, but it is exciting.
It is.
Well, Laura, thank you for your time. We appreciate the update, and it'll be exciting to see what happens moving forward with malting barley.
Yeah, just keep checking the corn newsletter for articles and my website.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Join us again in 2 weeks for our next episode.